And we are back with another wonderful episode of, I don't know, what are we doing? IRC Oblivion. For the folks listening, I'm going to preface this episode by saying that I am not well. I don't think I sound too terrible, but my lungs are rattling and I will be doing a lot of coughing. So if there are hard cuts in this episode from editing, that is why. But I'm going to try to hold it together and not die, at least for 15 minutes. I think I can hold it for 15 minutes.
15 minutes would be good. Yeah.
As long as I don't breathe in hard or exhale too deeply, I'm fine. If I just stay in the nice middle area, my lungs seem to work. But the very first thing I want to read is actually very lengthy and has big words, so I'm probably not going to make it through.
So you can do it.
So you might have to take over at some point.
Wait, what am I reading?
I don't know. Something about something on something. What's today's story? The Soul is Not a Smithy by David Foster Wallace.
It's definitely not a Smithy. We've seen this.
Believe it or not, sir, I actually really like this story. So you can't say, I know I made it sound like I didn't enjoy anything I've read in this book so far. I just didn't care for the first story. The second story, which is the only other one I've read so far, I actually I enjoyed. The synopsis is pretty simple. It starts off, it's about a kid. I don't remember if it ever states his name, but he is reflecting on a memory from his school in Columbus, Ohio in 1960. And it was a traumatic event in class one day when they had a substitute teacher. Without giving away the ending, which I don't think it really matters, a book that's 2000-ish published. The writing style on this was very unique. I would say brilliant. I really enjoyed how this was written because pretty much what it is there's this substitute teacher who kind of goes off the wall here, goes crazy. It ends up there's like a shooting situation. The kid in the classroom who is deemed like he might have a learning disability or is kind of slow. I got that he was just kind of like, ADHD a little bit, maybe not even hyper, just had attention deficit disorder, or at least was bored in class. He was a daydreamer. Let's just put it that way. He daydreams very extensively. And in this class, he gets put by the window, and the window has this weird grid style mesh where he envisions each panel of the mesh as like a story that he's unfolding in his head. And so you get all these split narratives in this story, and he's not actually paying attention to this traumatic event that he was involved in. So the telling of the story from that aspect I thought was really cool because it actually gives you a sense of what it would be like what is he supposed to be, like 7 in this story?
Something like that.
So it gives you a sense of what like a 7-year-old's memory of something like this would happen, because 7-year-olds aren't focusing on everything that's going on. You're not just going to remember, oh yeah, this is what lesson was given. And like everything's very fragmented, and it's more about the other things the kid sees and is pretending to see, rather, his daydreams and his thought process. And I really like that. I don't know about you, but I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the comic book sort of feel to it, how he was narrating his own life. I liked the irony of something incredibly important happening, and he wasn't aware that it was happening. And so he's kind of reminiscing about not remembering that it happened. I thought that was kind of cool and kind of spoke to how so many important things probably happen to us throughout our day. Granted, I don't know. I don't have any living memories of substitute teachers having, psychotic breaks, but important things happening around us that we're completely unaware of. And if we were to look back and try to remember what was going on, we'd pay attention to, I was on my phone checking my Twitter, and then, I was in the soup aisle. So I was like, hey, there's a new, can of soup over here. And I was like, this is actually very, very normal for the average person, not being aware that, oh, and then there was also an active shooter in the area. Had no clue. Or, hey, there was a tornado touching down 2 miles away from us, but had no clue about that. I was, comparing prices on either Campbell's bean soup or the off-brand, and I was like, is there really a difference? And just it was kind of cool to see that the narrator had no clue what was going on and didn't really know anything that was going on until afterwards, and he was told everything.
Yeah, that was very interesting. And he was able to actually break down like what was going on with the other people in the room but couldn't remember because he wasn't paying attention to what actually was happening. You know, like there was a kid who threw up. He knew the whole history of that kid when he gets nervous and he threw up, and things like that were very interesting. Just the way that he was able to break things down. Again, almost info dump like how Mr. Squishy was, where there's a lot of information being thrown at you in this story, but now it's from this kid's perspective. But I thought it was a lot more interesting in this story. It was, while all of it might not have been necessary, it at least served a purpose.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple other things that were really cool. Like he was talking about his nightmare, like his biggest nightmare was his father's life, who just had to go work every day, this awful, boring job, come home, and it was just like this mundane day-to-day life. That was his nightmare, and the way he wrote about that, I thought was incredible. And it was just like, oh man, that is terrible sounding. And then he also wrote about like dreams in such a cool way, about falling asleep and how there's this period before you fall asleep where you're aware that you're dreaming or going into a dream state, but you're still active, and you could even almost have some impact on the dream because you're aware that it's there. But then eventually you go over to that other realm, and then things change, and then you lose control usually. But I just thought it was really cool how anything like that, even like the kid daydreaming, like the way he wrote about it, it was just like, how does someone write about someone daydreaming where it feels like you're actually there in the daydream? Like, I thought that was amazing. Very few writers, I think, have the skill to pull something like that off. Like, you could talk about the daydream and how he broke it down into those little narratives and different panels and things like that. But to make it seem like an actual daydream you're witnessing or experiencing, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and it's that's one of the things. Like, I read a few stories further on, but beginning to realize that Wallace really doesn't write outside of a normal person's capabilities of understanding. He has a bigger vocabulary, and his writing style is very not normal. Like, you have to get used to long sentences and big paragraphs. So at first it does take work to get used to, but I think that's kind of true of, going back and reading Poe or anything like that, reading the poetry of Whitman, or, even getting used to reading Hemingway and his very chopped way of structuring his sentences and paragraphs. You kind of you have to train yourself to get used to reading a new style. And I think Wallace's style of doing this is actually very normal, is kind of what I'm getting. Is he talks about strange things or everyday things, but they have such an incredible impact. And you can be like, oh yeah, totally, I like fallen to sleep, I have the exact same sensation. Or, oh man, yeah, I was in school and I could tell you the exact number of tiles on the wall, or the total number of vowels in the ABCD ribbon that ran along the ceiling. I couldn't tell you a single thing my teacher taught about or anything about her. But it's kind of cool how he's writing about extremely normal things, but we're really entertained by him.
He brings to life the mundane in a way that, like, where Haruki Murakami uses mundane activities in his writing to kind of normalize people, and it almost accentuates the weirdness of what's to come. But Wallace doesn't do that. He just, like you said, somehow makes the mundane, such as counting tiles, not necessarily exciting, but he makes them entertaining. He makes it in a way where it's like, oh yeah, I could see why, like how this person thinks now, and I get a better feeling of the kind of person I'm dealing with in this story, because I too have a habit of, walking between lines on tiles or something, or counting ceiling tiles, or pointing out random letters and words and reform, just whatever the character tick is. This character in this story, the kid, he happens to he can't read very well. He might have a learning disability, but he could break down every number of letters in a word or a sentence or a paragraph, and he's just very astute that way. But when it comes to actually reading, he can't do that for shit. But then that also, you give that character trait, and then it's like, oh, well, maybe I can understand better why this character is daydreaming so much, and then why his daydreams are so vivid. Another really crazy part of this is the which I almost forgot about, was the subconscious level of the tension in this story. Not to shift too hard from what I was just saying, but like when the kid is having these narrations, is dealing with like a blind girl and her family, and each part of her family is going through something else. But then all of a sudden, everything gets very dark, and like the father in his daydream ends up getting his arm mauled off through a snowblower, and then the daughter, I forget, she gets like beat up or something, or something with the dogs too. Something bad happens to them. But then the mother, she dies because her car gets snowed in, and she carbon monoxide poisoning and all this awful shit. But then it turns out that was because the kid was subconsciously feeling the tension in the classroom, even though he wasn't paying attention, because the teacher's going fucking crazy. He keeps writing "kill them all" on the board all of a sudden, and all the students are frozen with fear. Some are crying. Like, it's just, the tension is just building up and up around him. He's not aware of it consciously, but subconsciously it's seeping into his daydream. I thought that was fucking crazy, because that was another thing I've never really read somebody like put to paper, even though that's something that happens to us, because I'm sure you've been in situations where maybe you're absorbed in your phone, or you're just reading, or just not paying attention, and then you could just kind of sense like something's off. Like there's something in the air that's not right, and you look around, and then you find there's, you're in a Walmart or something, there's a fucking lady passed out on the floor, or there's a car accident, or there's a panic of some sort. But to be able to write that takes a lot of skill as well. And I just really like that aspect, because it's crazy how you can have this narration and it's getting darker and darker, these stories that he's just a little kid is having. And it's like, why is this getting so dark? And you realize, because this whole at the very beginning, you know, there was a traumatic event. He keeps calling it a traumatic event. So there's no surprise that something very bad happens. What exactly happens? You're like, ooh, I don't know. I thought it was actually going to be worse than what it was, but yeah. Still, just like the kids' experience, little 7-year-olds, it would be very traumatic. Hey, fucker, don't scratch me.
Sorry, I'll stop.
You son of a bitch.
I was feeling hungry.
You were under the table scratching my foot.
Saw those thighs. I was like, oh, gotta get me some.
Ooey gooey. But
give me some baby rays.
But I really liked how he did that too, and just I've noticed that in his writing, like his tension building is very different from how other writers go about, at least that I've read in the past. Yeah,
it's that was actually one thing I told my wife. I was like, holy crap, like after reading this story, I feel like I needed almost an anxiety pill or something like that, because I was like, holy shit, that was intense. She's like, what happened? I was like, absolutely nothing. Like nobody got hurt. Like, but holy shit, that was crazy, man. I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, his ability to plant these, and what he does is he doesn't even hide it. I've read it a few times in I want to say definitely in The Shining, and a few times in Doom McKee, just to cite one author, Stephen King, where the author will plant a very clear clue in front of your face. I mean, he could hit you over the head with it and you'd be like, I don't even know what that is. That's crazy. Huh. I'm going to ignore it. And then later on, there's just this culmination. And I still don't know how David Foster Wallace did it, but it's absolutely insane. And it made me want to write better. Like, I need to figure out how he does this so I can do it, because this was amazing. And just, I don't know about you, I was equally as invested in the fake family that the kid was talking about and like narrating in his head and just daydreaming.
He wrote that family so well that for a moment I was like, wait, is this real? Like, is this also of like, is this really? And I was like, oh yeah, this is just the kid's imagination. I was like, what the fuck? Like, that's incredible.
But then, like, all this horrible stuff is happening to the blind girl. I was like, you don't even freaking talk about. And I think it was all born of the narrator of the story saw 2 dogs humping outside or something like that, and that's how, like, the dog being humped was actually belonging, it was a runaway from this and that. I was like, how did you get here? That's amazing, because my mind works exactly the same way.
Yeah, he built a whole story just from, not just a whole story, a divergent story that splits off into both parents and a little girl and the dog's journey just from seeing 2 dogs humping. And then he split them up comic book style into panels. That was like, saying that out loud, you're like, how would that work in a narrative in prose? But he does it very well. Like, it's excellent. I really liked it. I've been spacing these, unlike you who's just, reading this like a normal, I'm going to read the whole book. I've been spacing these out because you brought up a great point. It makes me want to write better, but this would definitely affect my writing style. And since I'm currently writing a book that is completely different from anything he's writing, I do not want that to blend in. So I'm spacing it out so I don't get that oversaturation of David Foster Wallace. And all of a sudden, I'm like, why did I use so many descriptors in this? Why am I info dumping right now? That has nothing to do with my story.
Why is my paragraph 10 pages long? I don't get it.
That's the one thing I will say. If you're, as my only dive into Wallace's work, if you were to read this stuff, you have to be able and you have to be willing to read a paragraph that will be a whole page long, because that's most of it. At best, I would say maybe each page will have 2 paragraphs, but most of them are just 1. That doesn't, for me, that's not like insurmountable by any means. I have no problem with that. Though when it came to that first story, I did, because it was just so fucking boring, which was done purposely, but I'm just like, I don't care. This story, though, I didn't find it a problem. I'm interested to see the upcoming stories. I wanted to read something here. These are not my thoughts or my opinions on this story. I just found this on Reddit and I thought it was really interesting. And since my lungs are fucked up, I might have trouble reading this. So this was posted by one Robert Jordan the Red. This was 2 years ago. So
Robert Jordan.
Robert Jordan. I don't think he was fighting anybody in any wars. It's not that Robert Jordan.
No,
from Hemingway's work, if that's who you're thinking.
Oh no, I was thinking about the Wheel of Time guy.
It could be that Robert Jordan. Whoever wrote this was very intelligent, much smarter than I.
Robert Jordan died like 5 years ago.
So you're saying maybe he time traveled to write this on Reddit?
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
Anyway, the title of the short story is a reference to one of the closing lines of Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Welcome, O life. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscious of my race. It also serves as a polemical response to the aesthetic theory proclaimed in this line from Joyce's novel, which is the summation of the entire line of argument throughout the novel. In Portrait, Joyce lays out an aesthetic theory that recognizes art as a mimetic artifact of reality as experienced by and filtered through the artist's mind, his soul. Stephen, the main character, fucking lung. I feel like I'm gonna die. Like that. Sometimes I wish I did.
Every break you do, you should just insert a fuck or a Homer dope.
Stephen, the main character, emphasizes his soul or inward cognitive functions as a site in which art, the uncreated conscious of his race, can be formed through the raw material of the reality of his experience. And this is more of this person's opinion. I believe that in The Soul is Not a Smithy, Wallace is criticizing the straightforward... Get off the fucking table. Why are you here? Why are you doing this?
Sorry.
God damn it, Ash. Put your pants on. No, this fucking cat that bit me is coming back for more. I believe in that, what was this story called? This guy put it in fucking abbreviation. I believe that in The Soul is Not a Smithy, Wallace is criticizing the straightforward metaphor of art as being forged mimetically from purely sensory experience by stressing the complications arising from the intermediary third element, the cognitive function of the artist. In Joyce's summation, this third element is described as a soul, as unproblematic force whose function is purely positively creative. In Wallace's story, however, the cognitive function of the narrator constantly disrupts and upsets the formation, the forging of the narrative. The narrator's cognitive function fails him. He cannot remember the details of the trauma accurately enough to form an authentic, aesthetic narrative of it. The entire narrative is disjointed, confused, fitting between events later on in the narrator's life. His construction of the second narrative that takes place within the wire meshing of the window, and the primary narrative which is trying in vain to be told through the medium of the narrator's defunct Smithy. The emergence of Ruth Simmons within the primary narrative is a further indication of the inability of the artist's soul, his cognitive functions, to form narratives accurate to real experience as the fictional narrative begins to merge with the narrative purporting to represent an event which actually happened. And Ruth was the fake blind girl that was in his, daydream, by the way.
Yeah, I think that was her surname.
Yeah. This is perhaps one of the central themes of all of Wallace's writing, the third element, the cognitive function of the subject, rendering all interactions between subject and object, art and reality, author and reader, or even just human to human in the real world, outside of an aesthetic framework, problematic, deficient, or outright impossible. The narrative of The Soul is Not a Smithy is an allegory of the failure of all aesthetic narratives, indeed all art, to be authentic and accurate representations of the reality of experience. The soul is not a smithy. It is more like a Borgesian hall of distorted mirrors that makes the chances of an image authentic and true to reality emerging from out the other end nigh impossible. Borgesian, I'm sorry, that threw me off. I don't read Borgesian, the word Borgesian too often.
I don't know about you, but I totally jacked off to all those words. Like, oh my gosh.
That is the typical David Wallace fan, by the way,
oh my gosh.
is that guy.
Nah, I think maybe we're atypical then. I'm happy about that because like I can understand where he's talking. You read some other stories by him and you're like, hey, I can totally see your narrative or your views on advertising or, you know, like in Mr. Squishy, the ridiculousness of the advertising machine and all this stuff. Like, I get it, you know, makes sense, totally understand. I'm just accepting this and understanding this and applying this to my own psyche in a completely different way than probably, I mean, maybe Wallace intended it to be all like hyper cerebral and, you know, hoity toity, you know, pinkies out, whatever shit. But at least for me, the reason I'm enjoying these stories, even Mr. Squishy, as painful as it was, because I'm able to find things that pertain to me, and I don't need to necessarily have those align with some sort of English major's, you know, wet dream of literary complexity. It's like, no, fuck you. I'm just like, if I want to enjoy The Raven because it's about a talking bird, then fuck you. I want to talk about a talking bird, and that's cool to me. But, you know.
But it's an allegory for his lost love and how she will never come back to him and his guilt of her die. I don't know.
Well, obviously, but it's like, you know, you don't need to necessarily. That's the glory of fiction. I think that's a wonderment of fiction, is that it can go deep. But saying that everyone needs to hit the same depths as you is like, you know, it's just kind of ridiculous. It's like, I'm a really poor swimmer, like physically in real life, I'm a poor swimmer. And so if you were to say, hey, you know, you need to swim even 1/10 of a mile, touch this buoy, and then like tread water for, you know, 3 minutes, I'd be like, okay, cool. So what I need to do is fill out a living will and do all this stuff because I'm a die. It's like, I can't handle that. And I think if folks, you know, are really intimidated by David Foster Wallace, it's by the narrative and the assholes and the cerebrals that are all surrounding them, saying like, oh man, this guy's like the cerebral blah blah blah, he's the orgasm of intellect in the 21st century, and you know, all this stuff. It's like, guys, calm down, let other people come to him at their own pace, appreciate him for what he's showing. Like in The Soul is a Smithy, maybe what they get out of this is a connection towards, man, I daydreamed all day long, or man, I had a problem you know, freaking reading or whatever like that, and I noticed everything around me other than that. Maybe that's a deep connection for that person, and it doesn't need to be more.
I'm not sure if I see the same allegory as this guy. The what did he say it was? The allegory of the failure of all aesthetic narratives to be authentic and accurate representations of the reality of experience, which is to me just a long-winded way of saying that most people's stories aren't based in reality. They're not true experiences. Is that what he's trying to say? That seems stupid.
I don't know. You made me wet saying that. So
well, he used the word aesthetic about 15 fucking times in that paragraph. So I don't know if David Foster Wallace was going for the aesthetic in this, or the you know, the failure of aesthetic in reality or whatever. Like, I didn't really see that in the writing. Like, what is the aesthetic here? Maybe in the narration of the daydreaming, the way he wrote that in the panel form and things like that. Certainly not in the tension building or that, you know, in that regard. I didn't get to watch any interviews on his explanation of this story solely. I wish I would have, because maybe he broke it down in a better way where we could have got more of his thoughts on this. But I don't think he wrote this, as you said, to be some cerebral intellectual asshat. I think he was... well, I know he went into the story. He wasn't planning on it being this long or anything.
Yeah.
I think he was just maybe kind of experimenting with a different way to tell a story, if anything. I think that'd be the most simplistic way to put it.
Yeah.
Like you said, I don't think anybody needs to go into Wallace's work thinking, this is going to be an intellectually superior endeavor, and I need to have a certain reading level and be able to think on these terms, and I need to be very cerebral in my approach. No, just read it, and if you enjoy it, you enjoy it. If you don't, you don't. You don't have to think. You can if you want. Like we had the Blood Meridian talk. You can read more into it than what might be there or what might not be there. By the way, McCarthy has 2 new novels coming out. I know you're excited for that.
Sorry, I was so excited I wanted to throw up.
Well, I'm assigning that to you for back-to-back book reviews for the site. So
I hate you so much.
I'll buy them for you. How about that? But you have to read them within a week.
I hate everything.
But yeah, so it's like the aesthetic aspect of this story, or even the previous story. Yes, there is an aesthetic there because the way he writes does come across very specifically. There's a very specific detail to how he writes. The info dumping, that's what we would call it, is info dumping. Obviously, for him, it serves a purpose. Because when you think of info dumping, normally you think of like long exposition that tells you like, the Saturn has blown up in the year 2099, and this is why the Intergalactic Federate. No, like that's info dumping. His version of info dumping is just adding way too much information that you might not think needs to be in there, such as in Mr. Squishy, where we had to go into great detail about what the fucking whatever the cookies or whatever the treat was made of, and what people felt about it, and what buildings are made of, or just whatever dumb shit was in that story. This story, it had a lot of detail and info, but it was more purposeful, and it was more in relation to the way this kid saw the world, which is what I liked. I don't know how... Again, I'm stuck on that stupid aesthetic thing. I don't understand what that guy was trying to point out here. Because what is the aesthetic of this kid telling a story from the future about a traumatic event from his childhood? Why do we always have to have a story where you read it and you go, well, what was the author really trying to say? What was his real meaning? Like, why do we always have to do that?
I feel like it needs to be more of a, like, you can read a story and know that the author... Okay, so yeah, ideally you would read a story. You would know that the author is trying to tell you something deeper. You enjoy the story as itself, but you know it's almost like having this intuition that there's something around the corner. So if you were to investigate it a little better, a little more thoroughly, maybe you would come around and see exactly what the author is seeing. But it shouldn't be another like, oh, I do that, and what I see is another corner, and what I see around that is another. Like, it shouldn't be an infinite digression in that way. It should be like, with The Soul Is Not a Smithy, you get the appreciation of this story that's told. And if you read these stories in order, which I would definitely recommend, being as far as I am in the book, I feel like there actually might be a reason that it's put in this order. If you read Mr. Squishy and then go into The Soul Is Not a Smithy, you're going to be jarred. You're going to be just, it's going to catch you off guard. It's going to be immediately intriguing. And I think that that's one aspect of it. I think if we're going to look at these stories, we can't look at them separately. We almost have to look at the book as a whole, just like you wouldn't pull a random chapter from, the Return of the King and be like, let's investigate this super deep and see what the author. It was like, no, what was Tolkien saying in the entire story, in the entire trilogy? What's the point? And so, yeah, I don't understand what that Reddit user is saying by, you need to have an aesthetic. Maybe I'm too stupid to understand, so that's always a possibility.
Well, he was doing it in reference to James Joyce's work, which James Joyce obviously, as a modernist, had an aesthetic to his work, which, in my opinion, makes it almost unreadable. Dubliners, I wasn't able to get through the one time I tried that just because of not just the language, I just found it boring. Finnegan's Wake is impenetrable, in my opinion, unless you're in a book club who spends 20 years breaking down one book. I understand the purpose of his work. I didn't read the artist, but I do know that is one of his more accessible works. I'm actually planning on reading that sometime because I do like James Joyce's writing style when he's being normal or, readable before he went all fucking super artsy-fartsy.
Speaking of farts.
To say Foster Wallace was going for a James Joyce aesthetic I don't
I don't
agree
see
with
it.
that. Yeah, I don't see that. And if he's just saying, like, what was this guy saying at the opening here?
Hoity-toity, fingers in the air.
It was a response to the aesthetic theory proclaimed in this line from Joyce's novel, which is the summation of the entire line of argument throughout the novel. So the aesthetic theory of Joyce's is that he recognizes art as a mimetic artifact of reality as experienced by and filtered through the artist's mind. So not even the character... Oh, also, and the main character. I guess the artist and main character are separated. I don't know. Again, I'm trying to decipher that. I would say that he's trying to state that the aesthetic, which again, I don't know why he's using that word so much. I don't think it means what he thinks it means. In this regard.
You kid my father.
But if you're trying to find the realism in the artist and the character, and I'm assuming the artist means the person who wrote the book and the main character of the book. Are you combining them as one? Are you saying the main character is a direct representation of the artist's mind? Are you saying that character thinks like the writer? I don't. Not in this story for sure. I don't think that's. I wouldn't say the 7-year-old boy in this story is David Foster Wallace.
Yeah, it's.
He obviously he added his real world ideas into this story, but I wouldn't say any character was him.
No, and you can look up easily on YouTube any interviews about The Soul is Not a Smithy. There's a really good one that I sent you. And no, I don't the purpose of this story, I don't feel, is to really challenge anything other than the importance of life and the events around us, to really narrate how inconsequential we view important things until they're right upon us, and then we have no idea what's going on. Maybe a look at it. There's a lot of different directions you can go, really, because there is a lot of depth. I feel like there are a lot of corners you can turn, but to say the argument that he's using about the artist's perception and all this stuff, it really doesn't apply to this, because it's not talking about a very common feature in Wallace's work, which is like advertising and corporate America and, all these things, which are featured far later in this volume. But it's not really present in this story. This one's really, it seems more an exercise or a way of viewing, personal memory, personal importance, because isn't the main character like writing letters to his son at some point? That's the feel I got in some of the excerpts. Like, this person did this time, and in the yearbooks they were able to find this and blah blah blah.
Well, this felt like a very like a vastly more personal story than Mr. Squishy. Like, this was definitely more of a personal style piece of fiction versus Mr. Squishy, which almost until the end almost reads like a fucking either a manual or I don't know, like you're in a seminar or something. It was very boring. But this story is like actual narration and has varying plot points and stuff. And I think you were right about like the personal writing to his kid or something, because it is somebody from the future telling what happened to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where the weight seems to come from. Is like it almost feels like, okay, so we're reading something and then we experience it through somebody's point of view. So there's a level of depth right there. And then we're realizing, a depth of fantasy and a depth of reality of what's going on with their classmates and the psycho teacher. And then through all of this, it's like it's like jettisons you up to this person who's writing to everyone, is realizing, hey, this is kind of what's going on. I was terrified of this as being a kid. And you kind of like waffle through depths as you're looking at the story. But at no time did I think that, oh man, what I'm experiencing is a question of what I'm experiencing through what I'm experiencing, which is kind of what that Reddit thing stated, was like, you can't trust the artist can't trust what they're saying unless it's what they create through what they're seeing, through what they're saying. I'm like, okay, you need to stop.
Well, just like looking through this thread on that Reddit in the response to that guy, like we stated earlier, is that a very certain subsect of people fall into the, I'm a fan of David Foster Wallace, I'm an intellectual. Like, that's what I got in that thread, is everyone's either very smart or pretending to be very smart. And so they're inferring all kinds of meaning to a story that might not be there. I would lean towards probably not there. I would imagine David Foster Wallace's work gets that a lot because he's considered the intellectual writer, the not so much counterculture, but like he fits a very specific style that a lot of people tried to mimic over the years. Again, he was the intellectual author. He was almost too smart, like the tortured genius almost.
Yeah,
I would give him that.
For sure.
I would say that would be his. He would fit that bill. And there is even besides his depression issues and stuff, there is a romanticized version of him that people want to aspire to, like a Kurt Cobain, where they see this guy who, again, the tortured genius, is very appealing to people, and they want to mimic that without actually having have the tortured part. So you end up having people who fake it. That doesn't work out well. And then you also have the intellectual side where you have people fake that as well. And then you have people who memorize the dictionary and try to sound more intelligent than they are. But their arguments never seem to hold up in proper debate. We see that a lot on TV and any form of news anymore. Any of these talking heads in the media, which I'm sure David Foster Wallace would have wrote amazing stories about if he was still alive today, because our current media is ridiculous. But without going too much, because we're almost 40 minutes into this, I wanted to do a deeper dive into this, but I've been fucking deathly sick all week. Like I said, I'm at the tail end of this, so that's good, but I wasn't. It was like one of those things, like my writing's been fucking awful this week too, but it's one of those things where it's like, I don't have the energy to do anything. Like I barely got reading. Like I read just enough, like a page or two every night of whatever I'm reading. And it's like that, even that sucks because I was reading chapters a night, writing chapters a night. I was on such a hot streak. Then I got sick, and so nobody cares about my woes. You do, Ash. I know you do. You're a heartfelt guy who loves his buddies.
I do.
To the very end.
I do. So much love.
So I will end this episode on saying I give this a 5 out of 5, this story. I really like this one. So now I'm 1 and 1 on David Foster Wallace stories in this collection so far. I didn't like the first one. I like this one. Both were very interesting, though. I will say that.
It's the first one was definitely really interesting. So I give it, both of them high marks and interesting. The entertaining aspect, I'm definitely 1 and 1 with you. With this The Soul is Not a Smithy is definitely a lot more entertaining than Mr. Squishy.
Put it this way, I would read this story again, would not read Mr. Squishy again. The next story that we will be covering here, which you already read,
it's like 3 pages.
Another Pioneer. If that's only 3 pages, I suppose we should do a breakdown of the next 2 stories then. You say that's a good idea?
Wait, well,
Incarnation.
The next story should be
Incarnations of Burned Children, then Another Pioneer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll do both of those because unless you feel Incarnations is a story we're going to have a lot to talk about.
No, it just made me really angry and uncomfortable for a minute. So, but the less time we spend on that, the more time we can spend on the other story, which is a lot more interesting.
Well, that's good. That's what I like to hear. We hope you folks enjoyed this. I'm glad we didn't do this yesterday because I sounded like I was gargling molten lava most of the day.
I gargling molten lava.
Oh, God, you sound like Gollum. I don't know. Again, I still don't know when I'm going to publish these episodes because I have not recorded the normal podcast this week, so I don't know if I'm going to have an episode for Tuesday. I might have to fucking either get Spencer over here real quick today or just do some bullshit of my own. I don't know. But anyway, folks, we thank you for listening, and we will check you next time.